Welcome everyone. Today we will read a verse of the 10th Canto of Bhagavatam that I was reading this morning. Verse 5.
Sharim sharam pram sravanum mihivayunam kalam bakam jam param renum harinam navidyatam yatrayanum karasham madavum nikagavam nyakam bhavam tisaham amvalim.
So this verse speaks about the nature of Vrindavan. Vrindavan is one of the forests of Praj, the land of love of Krishna. In Vrindavan, there was a constant blow of a fresh breeze coming from the streams, the lakes, and the waterfalls. It was transporting the pollen of sweet aquatic flowers that were perfumed, like the Karala, the lotus, and Utpala. Its luxurious and greenish vegetation was covering the land. Because of this, the inhabitants were not suffering from the hot sun of the summer. In this way, the inhabitants of Vrindavan could not feel any of the disagreements of the summer, disturbances. Purport. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that Vrindavan was fresh in the summer due to the breezes that were softly blowing on the waves of the rivers. The wind, such a thief, was stealing in silence and in an invisible way the pollen of the lotus. And then he was soothing with his fragrant, sweet breeze, he was soothing the people. Although usually the sun dries up everything, it was not happening in Vrindavan, and this way the place were covered with greenish vegetation. Also it is said in Padma Purana, O Brahmana, although the summer is very dry in Vrindavan, fresh grass was growing everywhere, just when it would be like monsoon.
Om Gyanati Milandasya Gyanam Jalam Shalakayam Shakshuru Meditam Janataisme Shigulave Nama Namaum Vishnu Padaya Krishna Plestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Damine Namaste Sarasvati Deve Kaulavani Pracharine Nilveshesha Sunyavadi Prachachadi Shatari Bhaunchakalpa Tarubhyacha Kripa Sindhu Bhyaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namo Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadada Shivasati Kol Bhakta Vinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare.
It is very important to hear about the abode of the Lord, because the fact of hearing about it gives the desire to go there. Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita explains Yatamam Prapadyanti, that he reciprocates with desire of living entities. And in the Bhagavad Gita, when he says that the last thoughts of the living entities that makes one's destination, we see that finally the evolution of the living entity in one's life builds another material life, or the possibility to realize and enter into the eternal abode of the Supreme Lord. And this is what differentiates a materialist and a spiritualist.
Un matérialiste,
A materialist,
sa destinée, c'est qu'il veut
his destiny
plus de plaisir.
is that he wants more enjoyment for himself or herself.
Et il n'a pas
And
conscience, en fait, de sa nature
he doesn't have,
spirituelle en tant que
he's
femme.
not aware of his spiritual nature as the
Et
soul,
également que l'âme
and
est une
also
forme,
that the
elle a des
soul
sens,
has a
elle a
form,
des-
has senses, has a
elle a des
name,
qualités.
has qualities,
Et elle a une place
and
dans la
has
demeure
a
éternelle
place
du Seigneur.
in the eternal abode of the Supreme Lord.
Alors, le dévot,
So the
c'est
devotee,
complètement différent.
it is completely different.
C'est qu'en étant engagé dans
It
le
is that
service de
in being
dévotion,
engaged in devotional service,
il éveille cette
he
nature,
awakens
ce
this
désir.
nature and this
Et c'est
desire.
pourquoi
And that is
il
why
va trouver un goût
he will find
particulier
a special
à
taste
entendre parler de la
in
demeure du Seigneur.
hearing about the abode of the
Parce que ça
Supreme Lord,
éveille sa
because it
réalité.
awakens one's
Alors
reality.
que lorsqu'il
Whereas
s'informe
when
du
one
monde matériel,
informs about in oneself about the
ça
material world,
endort sa réalité.
it makes
C'est
our
deux
reality
effets
fall asleep,
différents.
go asleep.
La connaissance
It is two
matérielle et la
different effects,
connaissance
material knowledge
spirituelle.
and spiritual
Parce que la
knowledge.
connaissance
Because
matérielle,
material knowledge
elle est liée à l'ignorance.
is connected to ignorance,
Et la connaissance
and spiritual
spirituelle,
knowledge
elle est
is
liée
connected
à la vérité.
to the truth.
C'est pourquoi
That is why
c'est des propensions qui sont
these
différentes.
are propensities that are
Et
different.
lorsqu'un dévot, il
But when a
entend parler de la
devotee, he
demeure du
hears
Seigneur,
about the abode of the
alors
Lord,
il entend parler de
then
sa
he
propre
hears
nature.
about one's own
Alors que
nature.
lorsqu'il entend parler
Whereas one
de la
hears
nature
about the
matérielle,
material
il
nature,
oublie la
he
vérité.
forgets his own
C'est
nature.
pourquoi
That is why
le Padma Purana
the Padma Purana
explique que
explains that
quelle devait être
what
l'activité des
should
êtres
be
vivants,
the activity of the
jamais
living
oublier
entities is to
Krishna.
never forget Krishna.
Toujours se souvenir.
Always remember Krishna.
Et Krishna,
And Krishna
ça veut dire
means
sa demeure et ses dévots.
his abode and his
Parce que le
devotees,
Seigneur n'est
because
jamais
the
seul.
Lord is never alone.
En fait, lorsqu'on médite
Actually,
sur
when we
Krishna
meditate
seul,
on Krishna alone,
c'est pas,
it is
c'est pas
not
Krishna.
Krishna,
Parce que Krishna, ça veut
because
dire
Krishna means
qu'il n'est jamais séparé
that he is never
de
separated
l'amour de ses dévots.
from the love of his devotees.
Et de la même manière,
And in the
Krishna
same way, Krishna
ne peut jamais être
can
séparé
never be separated
de ses dévots.
from his devotees.
C'est quelque chose qui est très
It is something that is really important.
Donc, lorsqu'on
So,
devient un dévot,
when we become a devotee,
on a le goût.
we have the taste for this.
Parce que
Because
lorsqu'on va lire
when we will
sur la
read
demeure du Seigneur,
on the abode of the Lord,
alors on va
then we
voir
will
ce qui
see
se passe.
what is happening
Parce que le
there.
sentiment,
Because the
le
feeling,
désir
the desire
de vouloir être dans
to
cette
want to
demeure,
be in this abode,
le Seigneur va
the
aussi
Lord
réciproquer
will also reciprocate
avec le désir du
with
dévot,
the desire of
en
the
lui faisant
devotee
percevoir
by
des
making him
subtilités
perceive
qu'il ne
subtleties
peut pas comprendre.
that one cannot
Et en
understand.
fait,
And
c'est
actually, it
très
is
important
very important
parce que dans
because
cette demeure,
in
il
this
n'y a que
abode,
de l'amour.
there's only love.
Bien que
Although
l'été,
the summer,
quand il est très chaud, c'est
when it is very hot,
extrêmement désagréable.
it is extremely displeasing,
Vraiment désagréable.
really
Mais à
displeasing.
Vrindavan,
But in Vrindavan,
l'été, il n'a pas
the
cette
summer doesn't
substance.
have this substance.
C'est comme
It is like
un feu d'amour.
a fire of love.
Quand il y a un feu d'amour
When there's a fire of love
et qu'une brise
and a
fraîche
breeze, a fresh breeze,
collecte en fait
which picks up
des perles
pearls of
des
water
lacs,
from the lakes and the streams,
hein, et qui vole
and which flies,
le parfum,
which
le
steals
pollen des fleurs,
steals the fragrance of the flowers, of the pollen
ce
and the
contact
flowers.
devient extrêmement agréable.
This contact become extremely pleasing.
Alors bien sûr,
Well, of course,
lorsqu'on est un matérialiste
when we are a
et
materialist
qu'on pense
and we think
à l'activité qu'il existe
about
entre un homme et une femme,
the activity
ça
that
éveille
is
le
there
désir sexuel.
in between a man and a woman, it
Mais
awakens the
lorsque
sexual
un dévot
desire.
devient
But when a
purifié,
devotee
il pense
becomes
à Radha et
purified and he
Krishna,
thinks
ça
about
n'awaken
Radha and
pas le
Krishna,
désir
it
sexuel,
doesn't
mais
awaken
au
the
contraire
sex
le plaisir
desire,
et la
but to
douceur.
the contrary, beauty and sweetness.
Lorsque
However,
Radha et Krishna
when Radha and Krishna
sont
are
dans leur jeu d'amour,
in their love play,
il y a naturellement
there is
la
naturally
chaleur de l'amour.
the heat of love,
Et la brise,
and the breeze,
les sons
the sounds
sont comme
are like
des rafraîchissants,
refreshers,
comme un moment
like
d'extase
a
où
moment
ils peuvent en
of
fait
ecstasy when they can relish,
savourer,
the
qu'il y a eu de...
moment of love that happened.
Et de la même manière,
And
en
in
fait,
the
dans le
same
monde
way, in the
transcendantal,
transcendental world,
lorsque Radha et Krishna
when
sont
Radha
séparés,
and Krishna are
ils
separated,
ressentent de la
they
séparation.
feel
Tous
separation.
les êtres
All living entities feel
de la séparation.
separation for Radha and Krishna.
Et également
And also
la joie de la rencontre.
the joy of meeting.
Mais la différence,
But the difference
c'est que dans la
is that
séparation,
in
on se
separation,
rappelle encore
we
davantage
remember even further
de l'être aimé.
the loved one, the beloved.
Pourquoi?
Why?
Parce que l'expérience
Because
qu'on a eue avec l'être
the
aimé
experience
se
that we had
manifeste
with the
dans la
beloved
séparation
manifests
d'une
in
manière
separation
davantage
in the way
puissante.
that is even more powerful.
Or,
However,
les fleurs
the
à
flowers
Vrindavan,
in Vrindavan
sont des grands
are
dévots du Seigneur suprême.
great devotees of the Supreme Lord.
Et de la même manière
And in the same
que
way
lorsque Krishna joue de
that
la
when
flûte
Krishna plays the flute
et qu'il captive
and he
le cœur des
captivates
gopis,
the gopis' hearts,
en fait, le sentiment
the,
des fleurs
the feeling of the flowers
qui méditent sur Radha et Krishna
which
sont
meditate
capturés
on Radha and
par
Krishna
le vent
is captured by the wind
et offerts
and
au
offered
divin.
to the divine couple.
Donc cette action
So
du vent,
this action of the
elle est
wind
quelque chose de très important.
is something that is really important
Parce que
because
parfois,
sometimes
dans la désolation
in desolation
et dans la séparation,
and in separation,
on ne sait pas comment offrir
we
notre amour.
do not know how to
On
offer
est
our
comme
love.
perdu.
We're like lost.
Et le vent,
And the wind
à Braj, est
in
tellement
Braj
miséricordieux
is so merciful
qu'il va apporter
that
le
it will
sentiment
bring the
de
feeling
la personne qui est pas
of the
différente
person
de la
that is
personne.
non-different from the
Parce
person,
que à Braj,
because in
le
Braj,
sentiment
the
et la personne
feelings
sont
and the
un.
person are one.
Et lorsque ces
And when
sentiments
these
sont
feelings
apportés,
are
alors
brought,
il y a aussi la rencontre.
then there's also meeting.
C'est pourquoi Vrindavan
That
est
is why
extraordinaire.
Vrindavan is extraordinary.
Et lorsque
And when
Vishila Vishwanath Thakur
Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains,
le vent tel un voleur.
the winds just such as a thief, just
Et
like a
c'est très
thief.
intéressant
And it is very interesting
parce que Krishna
because
est comme un voleur.
Krishna is like a thief,
Et l'action du vent
and the action of the
de
wind
prendre le cœur
to,
qui
to
est sous la forme
take the
du
heart,
sentiment de la,
which is in the
de la
form
senteur de la fleur.
of the feeling of the fragrance of the flower,
Comme
is
si le
brought,
vent était un voleur
just like the wind was like a
et qu'il
thief,
l'emportait
and he was bringing
à celui qui doit
to
le
the one that
recevoir.
must receive it, Krishna and
C'est
Radha.
très poétique.
It's very poetic.
En fait, des
Actually, personalities
comme
like
Vishwanath Thakur
Vishwanath Chakravarti
peuvent
Thakur,
voir toutes
they
ces
can see all these
subtilités
subtleties
qui sont
that
très
are
élevées
really
spirituellement.
elevated
Mais ils en
spiritually,
donnent
but they give
qu'une aperçu
only a
légère,
glimpse, a slight glimpse,
parce que c'est confidentiel.
because it is
Parce que l'amour
confidential,
est confidentiel.
because love is
Parce que dans ce
confidential,
monde
because in this
matériel,
material
quand les
world,
matérialistes
when
entendent
materialists they
quelque chose,
hear such things,
c'est juste,
it is just like
ça leur procure
it
aucun sentiment,
it brings
aucun
no
bonheur.
feeling and happiness.
Donc
So
l'acharya,
the
et
acharya,
c'est ça qui est très important,
and this is what is really important,
c'est qu'il donne un
is that
moyen
he gives a
pour que les
means
dévots puissent
for the
s'élever.
devotees to be able to
Il
elevate.
donne une
And he
base,
gives a
et
basis,
par le chant,
and through
lorsqu'on
chanting,
se
when we
purifie,
purify
et que
ourselves
le goût
and
pour le
taste
chant se
for the
manifeste,
chanting manifest,
l'attachement pour Radha
the
et Krishna
attachment
et
for Radha and
l'amour se
Krishna and
manifeste.
love manifest,
Alors,
then
par ce contact avec
through
leurs
this
paroles,
contact with their
on peut
words,
avoir une
we can
vision
have a
supérieure
vision that is
de
superior
Vrindavan.
of Vrindavan.
Et c'est ça qui est
And this
tellement
is what is
merveilleux.
so wonderful.
C'est que
It
à
is
partir
that
de
from
quelques mots,
a few
on peut
words
faire un tel voyage.
we can do such a travel.
Mais ça, c'est possible
But this is possible
que si vous avez la
only if you have love
pour Krishna,
for Krishna, for Radharani,
et vouloir être
and
avec eux.
longing to be with
Si vous
them.
n'avez pas ce désir,
If you do not
et
have
que
this
vous êtes
desire
simplement un
and you're
matérialiste,
simply a
qu'est-ce que c'est
materialist,
un matérialiste?
what is a materialist?
C'est quelqu'un
It
qui
is someone
accepte
who
de
accepts
simplement
God
pour
simply
être heureux.
to be happy.
Mais il n'existe pas pour
But
son
it doesn't
bonheur.
exist
Ça,
for
notre
Krishna's
vocation,
happiness.
c'est de l'aimer.
Our vocation is to
Et la
love Him,
vocation du Seigneur, c'est
and
de
the
nous aimer.
vocation of the
Mais si
Lord is to
simplement
love us.
on est dans les situations
But
de
if simply
business,
we're in a situation of
d'accepter Dieu
business,
parce que ça
of
nous apporte
accepting
quelque
God
chose,
because it brings
on
us
n'est pas des
something,
dévots.
we are not devotees.
Je vais donner un exemple.
I will give an example.
Par exemple,
For
certains
example,
dévots,
certain devotees,
ils ont un service
they have a service
et ils aiment ce service.
and they like this service,
Mais
but
ils sont attachés,
they
par
are
exemple,
attached,
à faire de la musique.
for example, to do music,
En vérité, plus pour
in truth, more for their
que
pleasure
pour le plaisir de Krishna.
than for the pleasure of Krishna,
Ou étudier.
or study, for example.
Et il y a l'histoire d'un
And
dévot,
there's the
et
story of a devotee, and
c'est
it's
que
interesting.
il vivait dans un temple,
He was living in a
il y
temple,
avait beaucoup de services,
there were a lot of
il n'avait pas
service,
le temps d'étudier.
he didn't have time to
Et donc il a
study,
demandé
and so he asked the authorization of his guru to be able to live
pour pouvoir étudier.
in the place to be able to study.
Parce qu'il pensait de cette
Because he
manière
thought in this
qu'il allait
way
pouvoir faire plus de
that he will
services.
be able to do more service.
Donc, parfois, les
So
gens
sometimes
font des
people like that, they
plans
make plans to go outside of a temple.
En fait, c'est
It's
déjà tout programmé
it's already all programmed
pour pouvoir
to be able
exercer
to
leur désir.
express their desire.
Mais qu'est-ce qui s'est passé?
But what
Il s'est
happened?
attaché à un chat.
That person attached himself to a cat. The cat needs
Donc après,
milk.
il a fallu une vache.
So after he needed a
Et
cow,
pour la vache, il fallait
and
une
for the
femme.
cow he needed a
Et puis
farm,
après, des enfants.
and after
Il était
children,
tellement débordé,
and he was so much
il n'avait
over
plus le temps d'étudier.
busy
Et
that he
après,
didn't have time to study. And after he remembered his
il est
guru,
venu, il a pleuré.
he went to his guru and he cried at the feet of Gurudev. He said, "Oh Gurudev, I was cheated
Parce que c'était un désir.
because it was a material desire."
Parce qu'un dévot,
Because the
il n'est pas
devotee
attaché à la
is not attached to the activity.
Il est attaché
He is
à
attached
plaisir.
to please Krishna.
Et c'est une preuve.
And it is a proof.
Parce que quand on est attaché
Because when we are
au plaisir,
attached to our pleasure,
lorsqu'on nous demande de service,
when we are
pour
asked
d'autres
for
choses,
service for
on
other
devient
things,
dérangé.
we become disturbed.
Et on fait même le plan.
And we even make the plan to leave.
Ça, c'est l'illusion.
This is the illusion.
Ça veut dire qu'on n'est pas
That
attaché.
means we're not attached to
On est
Krishna.
attaché à faire
We are
la
attached
musique,
to do
la
music
peinture,
or painting or whatever you want,
mais on n'est pas
but we are not attached to Krishna.
attaché. Un dévot,
Because a
peu
devotee,
importe ce qu'il
no
fait,
matter what he does
il est juste
or she does,
attaché à faire
is
plaisir.
only attached to please Krishna because there is a relationship of love. But when there's no relationship of love, then we can fall into traps. For example, there was a devotee during Prabhupada's time who was a professional musician. He started to do service. He started to have success. To the point where he had difficulty to practice his spiritual life. And he spoke about it to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada told him, stop. But he didn't stop. He let go of his spiritual life. It's very subtle, Maya. Very, very subtle. That is why we must develop a relationship of love with Krishna. It's really important. For example, if there's no relationship of love, when you hear about Krishna, you fall asleep. You're tired. For example, if you're a man and a woman, and you're in love with a man or a woman, when you hear speaking about the her or him, even if you're tired, you will become awakened. This is the nature of love. But when you don't have love, you hear about a person to whom you're not attached, then you want to fall asleep. That is why the devotees that sleep during the classes, they don't have love. In the same way, when it is the day, for example, each year, there's what we call the Vyasa Puja. It is a day where we worship the spiritual master. And it is the day where we reaffirm our love for the spiritual master. So, there are devotees because they don't have love. They have nothing to say. Because there's no love. They don't have any inspiration. It is a test. Because on this day, if you don't have inspiration, it proves that you don't have love. It's like that. Whereas the one who has love will do a lot of things on this day because this is the day where he must manifest love more than even the other days. And it is normal. For example, you have a child
Vous l'aimez tous les jours.
You love your child every day, but the day where it is the anniversary,
Parce
the
que ce
birthday, you do want to
jour-là,
do more because on this day,
il va être attentif plus à votre amour.
the child will be attentive more to your love.
Et ben, de la même manière,
But in the same way, when the
quand
Lord appears
des jours comme
on days like
Janmashtami,
Janmashtami,
on doit
we must
manifester
manifest
un particulier.
a special love.
Et c'est très important.
And it is really important.
Et ces jours-là,
And these
Krishna est
days,
très
Krishna
attentif.
is really attentive.
Donc,
So,
le développement de
the
la dévotion
development of devotion
ne se fait que par un amour.
only happens through love.
Tout est une question d'amour.
Everything is a question of love.
Et plus notre amour
And the
se
more
développe,
our love develops,
et plus on comprend
and the more we
le
understand
monde de l'amour,
this world of love,
plus on comprend
the more we
ce que
understand
Krishna fait pour nous,
what Krishna
ce que
does
les
for
dévots
us,
font pour nous.
what the devotees do for us.
Mais s'il n'y a pas d'amour,
But if there is no
on ne peut pas
love,
comprendre.
we cannot understand because it is a world of love.
Il n'y a que l'amour.
Only love reigns.
Et dans le monde
And
matériel,
in the material
cet
world,
amour-là, il n'existe
this
pas.
love does not exist.
Karma et la Chakuna sont deux. Il n'existe pas.
It doesn't exist.
Ce qui existe, c'est
What
karma,
exists is karma,
l'exploitation.
the exploitation,
Parce que le Seigneur
because the
reste
Lord
caché
stays hidden
pour que les êtres
for the
vivants
living entities
puissent
to be able
à ce qu'ils veulent.
to taste what they want. It is independence.
Donc, lorsqu'on aime
So when we
sans
love
Krishna,
without Krishna, that's what we call kama, lust.
ça veut dire que c'est un amour
That means it is a love
qui n'est pas lié
that is
à
not
notre
connected
réalité éternelle.
to our eternal reality, to our eternal constitution, our svadharma.
Krishna est là,
But when Krishna is there,
prema.
we call it prema. It is the true love. That is why,
Si on ne comprend pas
if we
la
do not
nature de cet
understand the
amour,
nature of this love,
si on n'étudie
if
pas
we
les relations que Krishna il a avec ses dévots,
if we do not study the relationships that Krishna has with his
alors on ne
devotees,
pourra pas
then we'll not be
s'attirer
able
par cet amour.
to be attracted by this
C'est
love.
pourquoi l'étude
That
du
is why the
Bhagavatam
study of
est
Bhagavatam is
importante.
so
En
important.
premier, le Bhagavad Gita, c'est
First,
comme
there's
ça.
Bhagavad Gita, it's like a basis
Pour comprendre qu'on n'est
to
pas
understand
là,
that we're
pour
not
comprendre
the,
qu'on n'a rien à
the
faire
body,
dans ce monde,
that we have nothing to
comprendre
do in
que
this
le
world,
Seigneur est une
to understand that the
personne
Lord is a
humaine.
person and that
Mais
He loves
après,
us.
c'est le Bhagavatam.
But after it, it is the Bhagavatam because we must hear the feelings of the devotees of the Lord who are at different levels.
Et après, on
And
doit
after, we must
comprendre
understand
les relations qui
the
existent
relationships
dans
that
la
are
plus haute
present
douceur.
in the highest sweetness in Vrindavan.
Et la nature
And
de
the
Krishna.
nature that Krishna, the nature of Krishna, the nature of the love that Krishna has for his devotees, and vice versa.
Sans ça,
Otherwise, we cannot progress.
la Bhagavad Gita, c'est juste
Bhagavad Gita is just a little basis
pour comprendre qu'on n'est
to
pas
understand
le
that we're not the body.
corps. Une fois qu'on comprend
Once
ça,
we understand
alors
this,
on peut comprendre
then we
qu'on
can
doit
understand that we
développer
must
un
develop
amour.
love of God and a relationship. Otherwise, it is not possible.
Pourquoi on écrit des livres?
Why do we write books?
Pourquoi les
Why the
acharyas
acharyas?
ont révélé tellement de choses?
I revealed so many things.
C'est pour nous.
It is for us.
Parce que dans cet
Because
état- dans cet état
in
de-
this state of
on ne
forgetfulness,
peut pas développer l'amour.
we cannot develop love.
Donc c'est tellement
So
important.
it is so important to study.
Ceux qui étudient pas
Those who do not
ne
study,
peuvent pas progresser.
they cannot progress.
Parce que
Because
on prend l'exemple que le cœur est
we
comme
take
une
the example
terre
like that the heart is like the
et que la
land,
connaissance transcendantale,
and
c'est comme une
transcendental
graine.
knowledge is like a seed,
Et le Saint-Nom est
and
comme l'eau.
the holy name is like water.
C'est pourquoi
That is
on
why
doit purifier
we
son
must purify our heart
par le fait de rendre un
by the
service
fact of
au
rendering
pur
a service to the pure devotee of the
Seigneur.
Lord, to the Supreme Lord.
Et lorsque ce cœur
And
est
when this
purifié,
heart is purified,
alors toute cette
then
connaissance
all of
va
this knowledge
fleurir
will flourish.
par le chant.
How? By the chanting.
Parce qu'il faut de l'eau pour
Because
que la graine
we need water for the seed
puisse germer.
to be able to
Mais en même temps, il faut
sprout.
miséricorde.
But at the same time, we need
Parce que
mercy.
le nom,
Because the name
il ne peut pas
cannot
se
manifest
la miséricorde
without
de Krishna.
the mercy of the Vaishnavas.
Pourquoi?
That is why,
Dans tous les aspects,
in all aspects,
la miséricorde et le
mercy,
Seigneur sont présents.
the mercy of the devotees of the Lord is present. But when we chant
Avec cette connaissance
with
qui va faire
this
apparaître
knowledge that will make
désir
appear this desire
à
through the hearing of the glories of Vrindavan from the mouth of pure devotees, then at that moment, the name will blossom, will make all these wonders blossom in the, and make us realize who we are. And what is really interesting is that in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaks about the flowery language of the Vedas. Flowery means it is exaggerated. For example, when we speak about the heavenly planets to be the highest goal, it is an exaggeration. Which means when it is an exaggeration, it is something that we will hear, but that will never give this true fruit. Why? Because the attainment of the heavenly planets is temporary. When our pious acts becomes consumed, we go back on earth. So it cannot be the highest goal since it is temporary. So the worship of the demigods, which gives the attainment of their planets, cannot be the highest worship. The proof is that Krishna explains it in the Bhagavad Gita. But since the Lord is eternal, His devotional service is eternal, His devotees are eternal, and when we engage ourselves in this path, then everything becomes eternal. The proof is that when he says, Nyabhikramanashosti, in this verse he says, never anything is lost, because it is eternal. The slightest step gives us in our next life, if we don't go up to the end, to start again. We cannot go back track. Once we start hearing the glories of the Lord on a transcendental platform, not religious but transcendental, which describes His form, His name and His qualities, His pastime, we cannot go back track. Even if you reject in this life, we will come back in our next life to go further. So, when we understand the nature of the soul, then we cannot let go of what is true. And this is what differentiates a materialist from a devotee, is that when we approach this knowledge through doubts, through our material conception, we cannot truly understand the essence of it. But when we approach this knowledge through a good attitude, humility, and by the fact of desiring to receive love of God, at that moment, this knowledge manifests itself personally and carry us away in the eternal reality. It is an experience. That is why we must have this faith. Krishna explains that the living entities that are doubting, they attain nothing. Because Krishna reciprocates. We need the desire to establish a relationship. Let us look at ourselves. Since we are made of the same nature like the Lord is made, if someone approaches us, but that person is like cannot walk, that in the sense that that person is duplicitous, that person has doubts about us, would you reveal yourself to that person? Will you give your heart? So why do you approach the Supreme Lord of reciprocating with the living entities, since you yourself are doing it? It's not normal. This is what it means to be materialist, is that we accuse, whereas we have the same nature.
Mais quand la nature devient
But when
pure,
the nature becomes pure,
alors on peut comprendre
then we can
que le
understand
Seigneur
that the
ne
Lord
peut pas
cannot
relationner avec autre chose que
relate
l'amour pur.
with anything else than pure love.
Parce que dans sa nature
Because
à
in
lui,
his own
l'amour
nature,
pur n'existe pas.
impure love does not
Dans
exist.
son monde à lui,
In his world,
il n'y a pas d'amour impur.
there's no impure love.
Tout est pur.
Everything is pure.
Simplement, il se
Simply,
manifeste dans le
he,
cœur en tant que
it,
l'âme suprême
he
de
manifests in the
l'amour.
heart as the super soul,
Et
Antaryami, and he accompanies the living entity.
quand vous faites des choses
When
horribles,
you
le
do
Seigneur
terrible
voit tout.
things, the Lord is with you, he sees you.
Il entend tout.
He hears everything, he sees everything.
Mais
But
dans ce moment-là,
in this moment,
vous n'êtes pas vous-même.
you're not yourself.
Parce que Krishna,
Because Krishna,
il sait qui vous êtes.
he knows who you are.
Mais
But due
dû à l'association
to
avec
the
les trois modes de la nature matérielle, l'ignorance, la passion et la vertu,
due to the association with three modes of material nature, ignorance, passion, and goodness, you have developed another nature,
qui peut être assourd,
which can be asuric,
mauvaise
bad,
ou dévique,
or divic,
favorable.
favorable.
Mais quand elle est mauvaise,
But when it is bad,
le Seigneur ne peut que vous observer.
the Lord can only observe you,
Parce que vous ne pouvez pas
because you cannot
désirer une relation,
desire a relationship with
parce
Him,
que votre nature est mauvaise,
because your nature is bad,
parce que vous avez trop d'orgueil.
because you have too much pride.
La mauvaise nature, c'est l'orgueil.
Bad nature is pride.
C'est de vouloir remplacer le
It's to
Seigneur.
want to replace the Supreme
On
Lord.
est tout petit, hein,
We're very small, we're
on
insignificant,
pense qu'on est illimité.
and we think we're unlimited.
Et pourtant,
And
quand les
still,
réactions de ce
when
monde
the
viennent,
reactions of this
on
world
comprend
come,
qu'on n'est pas
we understand that we are not
on se
unlimited,
retrouve petit.
because we find ourselves very small.
Quand il y a un tsunami, par
When there's a
exemple,
tsunami, for example, that manifests,
tout petit.
we become very small. Everyone is very
Même
small.
les grands hommes,
Even the great businessmen,
les présidents,
presidents,
tout le monde est tout petit.
everyone is very
Parce que la
small,
nature matérielle est très
because
petite.
material nature is very
Mais
strong.
l'orgueil
But the
nous
pride
fait imaginer
makes
qu'on est
us
sûr,
imagine that we're
qu'on est
overpowerful, that we are
on a
independent,
besoin de personne.
that we need people.
Et donc,
And so,
cette nature qui est
this
mauvaise,
nature which is bad
elle ne permet pas au Seigneur de
does not allow for the Lord to reciprocate because we cannot see Him. We are insensitive to Him.
Et donc, il peut
And
simplement
so,
rester
He
comme
can
notre
simply
ami,
stay like as our
comme
friend,
nous.
behind us, just like
Mais
a
en fait,
shadow.
il attend,
But actually, He's waiting
parce qu'il sait
because He
que dans
knows
ce monde,
that in
vous
this
allez
world,
souffrir.
you will suffer.
Parce que quand vous avez
Because
cette
when
mauvaise nature,
you have this
vous
bad
faites des
nature,
mauvaises
you do bad
activités, et vous
activities,
allez prendre les réactions,
and you must
et la
receive the
souffrance
reactions. So suffering must come.
Et c'est à ce moment-là
And it is at that
que
moment
l'être cherche un refuge.
that the living entity is looking for a shelter. And it is at that moment that Krishna influences the being to go back to Him gradually. That is why there are so many religions, etc., according to the consciousness of the living entity at that moment and the progress he has done in his previous lives. It is so perfect because time does not have any existence. Sat, it is eternal. Najayate Vramyatik. It never had any beginning or end. It's like the Supreme Lord, it is inconceivable. And He is waiting. And there's the time, because the time does not have any presence. And it is simply at a certain point in our evolution that we will want to be with Him. And it is then that the relationship starts. And it is when the whole veil disappears. So right now, we are at a certain spiritual level. And we can perceive or not perceive. That's all. According to our previous lives, certain have love for Krishna and others don't. But they have the benefit, they don't know why, of engaging themselves in this service. Still they don't taste. But it is because there is a purification that is needed. Cheto Darpanamarjanam. A purification, when the purification becomes more and more strong, then it is just like we perceive the truth. And from there, we desire. That is why we must understand that each one is at a different level. It is true, our experience of love of God, that we can understand this.
Mais lorsqu'on
But
l'entend,
when we
il
hear
y a une
it,
forme d'expérience.
there's a form of experience if we do not have
Parce que quand
pride.
on l'entend,
Because when we hear
on va
it,
commencer à le percevoir.
we start to perceive
C'est par
it.
la connaissance qu'on
It is
perçoit.
true knowledge that we
Moi, par
perceive.
exemple, quand j'étais
Myself, for
enfant,
example, when I was a young child,
mes parents m'ont pas expliqué tout
my
ça.
parents did not explain all these things to me.
Ils m'ont fait croire
They make me believe
merveilleux ici.
in a wonderful world
J'ai
here.
tout de suite compris que ça avait
And I
rien à
immediately understood that it had nothing
voir.
wonderful.
Dès qu'on voit
When we open the windows and we see
avec des voisins
a big building in front with people who don't love you, you understand very quickly that it is not so nice. With elevators that are full of spitting,
d'autocollants.
of stickers.
À cette époque-là, il n'y avait pas encore
In these days, there were not the tags.
On comprend très rapidement.
So we understand very quickly it's not so nice.
Et on comprend pas.
And we don't understand.
Et la seule chose qu'on peut
And the
faire,
only
c'est
thing that
rester
we
dans
can
la
do is
société
reject
parce qu'on a
society
envie de devenir comme eux.
because we are afraid of becoming like them. They don't have solutions for us.
Krishna, lui, il a une solution.
But Krishna, he has a solution in the Bhagavad Gita.
Donc quand vous rentrez en contact,
So when you enter in contact with
ce qui
knowledge,
s'est passé,
this is what
tout
happened.
de suite,
Immediately,
ça m'a délivré.
it delivered me.
Tout de suite.
Immediately.
Parce que ça m'a donné
Because it gave me an answer.
enfin
At
quelque chose de
last,
substantiel.
something that is substantial.
En fait, quand je
Actually,
suis devenu un voyou,
when I became like
c'était simplement un rejet.
a thug,
Je voulais
it
pas
was simply a
tous ces gens
rejection, because I didn't want to be like all these people, but I didn't have the solution
pour accepter ma réalité.
to accept my reality.
Sur l'environnement.
So I hit on the environment
M'adapter à l'environnement.
instead of adapting myself to the environment and sit as a mercy of the Supreme Lord. And this is the trap.
Pourquoi les êtres ont besoin
That is why the living entities, they need knowledge. That's why we need to distribute books. We need to distribute mercy. You have received it. If you don't give it,
Elle fleurit pas.
it will not blossom.
Il y a rien de pire que de
There's
recevoir
nothing worse than
et de pas
receiving
donner.
and not giving.
Ça apporte
It brings
naturellement une frustration.
naturally a
C'est comme
frustration.
être un avare.
It's like being a
Vous recevez,
greedy
mais vous
person.
donnez pas.
You receive, but you
Vous
don't
êtes pas
give.
prêt.
You're not
Vous
ready.
avez reçu,
You have
vous
received,
ne voulez pas sortir.
but you don't want to come out, help
Vous voulez
others.
simplement
You
rester
simply
dans le
want
temple pour être bien.
stay in the temple to be good, to feel good.
L'amour de Dieu peut pas venir.
Love of God cannot manifest.
C'est pas possible.
It is not possible.
Il faut donner le Saint-Nom.
We need to give the holy name. We need to give knowledge. We need to give prasadam.
C'est pour ça que nos
That is why our
acharyas,
acharyas,
nos
our spiritual master, they have asked us to give. Because when you give, you receive.
plus vous donnez,
The more you give, the more you receive.
alors bien sûr, faut
So
aussi
of course we
donner
need also have to the proper
parce que si
state of
vous
mind.
donnez,
Because if you
vous êtes
give,
mauvais,
but you're bad,
avec les dévots, avec les
with the
êtres
devotees,
ça
with the
marche
living
pas non plus.
entities, it doesn't work either. You need the attitude.
Vous comprenez?
You understand?
Ça sert à quoi
What is the use
de distribuer?
of distributing?
Ça profite à
Of
tout
course,
le
it
monde.
benefits all living
Vous,
entities, but for
si vous faites
you,
du mal
yourself,
aux autres,
if you
et que
hurt
vous
others
distribuez,
and you
ça va pas le
distribute,
faire non plus.
it won't make
Il
it
faut
also.
aussi la bonne attitude.
We need also to have the right attitude. It's really important.
Il faut ouvrir les yeux.
We have to open our eyes.
De quelle manière on fait parfois le
In
mal
which way sometimes we hurt
dans des paroles,
in our words,
dans des gestes,
in gestures,
même
even
juste de faire la tête.
just pouting or making a sad face.
On doit être un porteur
We must be
de ce message.
an ambassador of this message.
Et pour ça, on doit
And for that,
accepter une
we must
transformation.
accept a
On
transformation,
va vivre pour nous.
not live for
Quand vous
ourselves.
faites la tête,
When you
c'est pas
pout, when you're not happy, you live for yourself.
les jours où vous dites, ah,
The days where you say, "Oh, that person,"
quand elle est comme ça,
when that person is like this, "Oh, it's terrible," you live for yourself.
combien de fois ça vous arrive?
How many times it happens to you per day?
Mais quand vous vivez
But when
pour
you
ce
live
Seigneur,
for the Supreme Lord,
vous êtes prêt à tout tolérer.
you're ready to tolerate everything. Everything.
Parce que vous devenez
Because
un
you
instrument
become
d'amour.
an instrument of
Et
love.
ça, c'est la preuve
And this is the
que
proof
vous avez un contact
that you have a contact,
véritable avec
a
le
true contact with the Holy
Seigneur.
Name,
Vous allez
is that you will evolve.
Parce que vous êtes un serviteur.
Because you are a servant. Those who never evolve,
C'est qu'ils sont pas des serviteurs.
it's because they are not
Parce
servants.
que quand vous êtes
Because when you are a
vous êtes
servant,
attaché
you're attached
à votre relation
to your relationship with Krishna.
C'est pour ça que vous êtes heureux.
That is why you're happy.
C'est un beau programme.
It is a beautiful program.
Et on doit
And we must attach ourselves to it,
pas que pour nous, mais pour
not
les
only
autres.
for ourselves, but for others.
Une communauté,
A community, imagine a community where we all pout,
on est tous frustrés.
we're all frustrated.
Il n'y a même pas un petit bonjour le matin.
There's not a good morning in the morning. It's like you pass in front of one and the others. I have known that.
Vécu un moment
I have lived one moment
dans une autre institution,
in another institution,
et le temple était
and the temple was so harsh. Poof.
et là je peux vous dire
And I can tell you,
vous souffrez.
you suffer.
Mais
But
lorsqu'on reçoit la miséricorde,
when we receive the mercy of the Lord,
on apprend aussi beaucoup
we learn also a lot.
parce que les autres
Because others
qui souffrent
who suffer
et qui n'ont pas
and who do not have a good behavior,
ils deviennent pas
they,
une source de critique,
they don't become a source of criticism,
mais ils deviennent une
but they
source
become
d'inspiration
a source of inspiration
pour pas devenir
to not
de cette manière.
become in this way.
Parce qu'on voit à
Because
travers les autres.
we see through others, we learn through others,
Et en fait, ça devient notre
and they become our teachers,
Et
and
tout s'harmonise.
everything harmonizes
C'est
itself.
ça le dévolu, c'est.
This is the devotee of the Lord. The one who is not a devotee, he says, I'm tired of it, I'm not going to stay here. He thinks from time to time like that. But the one who is a devotee, he cannot think like that. Because
Il apprend tout.
he learns always.
Il évolue tout
He evolves constantly
à travers les autres.
through others.
Et donc,
And so,
ce qui peut paraître mauvais,
what can seem bad for some
il devient pour lui
becomes for him or a way of elevating oneself. This is the path of love.
C'est pourquoi,
That is why
dans un temple,
in a temple,
il y aura toujours quelqu'un.
there will always be someone that you will not tolerate.
Mais quand vous devenez un serviteur,
But when you become a servant,
il devient votre meilleur.
that person becomes your best friend.
Parce que c'est grâce à
Because it is due to that person that you progress.
Mais ça, c'est possible.
But this is
Si
possible
on devient un serviteur.
only if we become a servant.
Et un serviteur,
And a
c'est
servant,
24 sur 24.
it's 24 hours a day.
C'est pas 6 heures par
It's
jour.
not 6 hours a day or 7 hours.
Et après,
And after,
vous avez votre petit royaume
you have your little kingdom
avec ceux que vous aimez.
with those you love, those you don't love.
Non, non.
No.
La demeure du Seigneur,
The abode of the Lord,
c'est
it is
une mise en application
application
du sentiment qu'on a pour lui.
of the feeling that we have for Him.
S'il n'y a pas d'amour,
If there's no
il n'y
love,
a pas d'amour pour les autres.
there's no love for
S'il y
others.
a l'amour pour Krishna,
If there's love for
il y a
Krishna,
l'amour pour tous les autres.
there's love for all living entities.
Il n'y a pas de pénurie d'amour.
There's no lack of love.
Et s'il n'y a pas d'amour
But
pour
if there's no love for Krishna,
alors vous allez naturellement
then you will go
chercher
naturally search for love,
l'amour, mais
but
simplement pour vous.
simply for yourself.
Et dans cette conception,
And in this conception,
il y a la conception de dualité,
there's the conception of duality,
ami, et
friend and enemies.
c'est pourquoi
That is why
ça ne peut pas être parfait.
it cannot be perfect.
On va s'arrêter.
We will stop here.
Jai Shri Ram.
Jai.